Hey, we're here. We're going over beginning Hive Checks PowerPoint. This is what you're looking for in the next 30 days after you've installed your package bees, nooks, or coming out of winter, and what you're kind of looking for to get on a regular basis of hive inspections and checks. This was written by Michael Jordan by a bee-friendly company. And now what we're going over is just a brief introduction of what it's like in the first 30 days of getting your bees. So you've installed your package of bees and the nook, or you're coming out of winter. Package of bees, you put them in the hive, you put your queen cage in, you did everything with what was acceptable from the notes you usually get from a package bee company. Or you've installed your nook by removing the frames out of a box and placing them into a larger hive. Now, package bees will come with different directions, and there's many different kinds of packages. Most of the time people are telling you to dump them in, or you do what they call the march or walk them up a sheet. And when you're doing nooks, most people are doing what they call a new nook insertion, where some of the nook sides come off and the frames are just removed out the side and into a box. So there are many ways to install these, but we're basically looking for generally the same things in every situation, from either the nook or from the package bees, or even coming out of winter. The first thing we really want to do is to go ahead and start right away is monitoring and record keeping. It's one of the #1 things that's going to help you maintain and monitor your hives throughout having them. When you work with other master beekeepers or other people, they're not going to be able to help you unless they can go through and talk about what your experiences are and what led to some of the problems, or how we could have prevented them, or how we're going to do some maintenance on them. So record keeping, everything from what kind of bees you got, the weather, the time of day that you're checking them. These are all very important things when it comes to doing it, and there are many types of forms of record keeping. Most of our record keeping, we're going to do the installation. This is where it all starts. You want to document everything and every site visit. And you want to set up your hive checks. We teach the 9/11 method here at a bee-friendly company. And so it's all based on different things. We say 9 to 11 days because after looking at farmers' almanacs, calendars, holidays, and etc., there are things that we cannot always control. The schools packages that I'm working with the school district were installed on the 4/28/18, and this will be the date we'll be looking after for our documentation for the school district. But the reason you're looking to doing documentation and your hive checks based on farmers' almanacs and calendars, you don't want to be opening up a hive when it's raining if it falls on the 9 to 11 days. So you really want to check to make sure that when you're doing your inspections that you're doing them on days that inclement weather or things are not going well, and you still do your inspections, remember, even throughout the wintertime when there's snow, by doing outside observation and weighing of the beehives for emergency use. So documentation is very important. You can start off with documenting things such as the weather, the time you went, the type of hives, the weight, and there are many companies that have come out with their own documentation portfolios that you can use. And you can just pick those up at maybe even stores or out of books, or download them. Here's one from Dannett. Get a system that you're going to use. A good record keeping system. Even some clubs and organizations have developed their own. And we've included like weights, flight patterns and stuff like that. So you can get really in depth. Record keeping is basically you trying to observe your hive. Observation of your work is going to be the most important aspect in your beekeeping skills. All right, so you've installed the bees, right? Or we've come out of winter, or we've installed the nook. And the first check we want to do is to see that queen, right? So in 3 to 4 days after you install, you have to check your bees and see if everything has, when you go, if the bees are still coming in and out. So after 3 to 4 days after you've got those bees installed, the packaged queens are placed in a cage and sealed with candy, and the bees are to eat through the candy to release the queen. So when you get there, the first thing you want to do is check to see if the queen is alive, because if she's still in the cage and she's not moving around and she's dead, you need to get a new queen. So we're going to check to see if our queen is alive. So we're going to have to pull out some frames probably and see if we see her wandering around on the frames, or if we see her still in the cage. Now, if she's still in the cage, we want to check to see how much candy is eaten. Have they started eating the candy or not at all? If they've not eaten the candy at all, you might have to get a new queen because they don't like this one. And if they started eating the candy and they haven't gotten really punched through it, you might need to take a little nail or thumbtack or something and kind of, don't punch it all the way through the candy and kill the queen, but kind of get some of that candy out there so they can eat it. And if they've eaten through the majority of the candy and they're almost through, you can even release the queen. So in 3 to 4 days, basically, what we're looking for is to see if the queen is alive, and basically we're trying to get her out of that cage, and she should be acclimated for the hive, and the hive should already like and want to take her. So that's something to think about. If the queen is not out, get her out, and if she's not alive, we need to order a new one. And if the queen is out, now we have to do the hunt. Right, so you're going to be looking on a couple frames on the clusters of bees to see your queen, and you're going to see if there's a dot on her. In 2018, the bees came out and they were a red dot, so we'd be looking for a red dot this year. Now this goes with the same thing with the nook. The nooks, the queens are already working, right? They come on a box of frames, 4 to 5, have brood, pollen, and they're already going. So you're going to be looking for a queen that's going to be a little bit harder to find and probably is not marked. That you're going to have to be looking across these 4 or 5 frames to see if she's there. And remember, in 4 to 5, or in this 3 to 4 day time period, you're already going to have hatching brood that's already coming out of those, as well as they'll start building on frames that you've put those in. And depending on you've installed your nook frames, we always put ours to one side, making the bees move across and not directly in the center, but that's how we work ours with our M3 hives. But you're going to be looking through these frames to see if the queen is going and if there's any comb build starting in the next frames. Now, once we've got them in, that's when everything's basically started. What we're looking for is that once we've released that queen in 3 to 4 days, we're going to start looking to see if there's any wax build. They're going to start building wax off the tops of the frames and off the foundations. Now with the nook, right, we're going to try to see the difference between if the darker comb to the wax comb. Now in this photo you can see here that with the frame, when the queen is released, you can see they just started making wax coming off and the queens just start walking around, compared to a nook where they've already got cat brood and everything going on. So on the left hand side you're looking at a new queen. That's what you would be looking for on a release package. And that's basically what a frame looks like with just new wax, and they're just starting out. You can see there's not any brood and there's just very little bees kind of clustered around working. Which compared to the right where the queen's on a nook and they're already starting to attend and look at the brood patterns. So these are comparisons of kind of like what you're looking for when a queen's coming out. These are queens, and you can kind of tell the difference. And this is what we're going to start looking for as a new beekeeper on our frames. Now we do a 9 to 11 check. Now this is how we use record keeping and observation to keep track of our bees. And it starts now, right, that we've in 3 days to 4 days we've made sure the queen is released, and that's when we started. 9 to 11 days after we found that queen is no longer in that cage, or we found her on a frame after 3 to 4 days after we've put that nook in, we're going to start our hive checks. And this is where our date starts. We're going to start checking now 9 to 11 days after we found that queen or released her. 9/11 is a system developed by myself in 2003. It's been shown that if checking a hive every 9 to 11 days helps control your hive from swarming and other problems that can happen in a 15-day time span. And what we're talking about a 15-day time span is that you can produce queens. You can get mite infestation, and that's usually when mites are starting to infiltrate the hive. You're going to be able to see how wax larvae from moth as well as beetles are starting to accumulate over those time periods. And it also helps with if you're going to do any type of testing that it's going to give you a regulatory that every 9 to 11 days we're looking for a symptom or we're looking for a outcome from medication. By checking a hive every 9 to 11 days, it disrupts brood cycle. And what happens is you can pull brood out and move it to other hives if necessary, because in 23 days, basically bees are going to start hatching. So we're going to break that in half. Basically, all this brood is capped, and we can move it into another hive at most of these times, so they can be popped and be birthed into these other hives without any problems. Also, in every 9 to 11 days, right, is a good time to check because queens are made in 15. And if we didn't catch it in the first inspection, 9 days later we did, and we might be able to get it before she hatches and prevent a swarming of losing our bees. So this is a great way to either make queens, because you have a 15-day time span, or help you prevent swarming at all times of measures. This also, as you're getting into this habit, bees will get used to your patterns, motions, smells, and basically that you're infiltrating their hive, and it gets you and them on a good working basis. So frequent patterning and visits will help you and your bees get established to be more calm and subtle when you're working them, and it makes it so that when you do go in, you're able to see things faster. Instead of scraping a month's worth of Ber comb off, you're doing it probably 3 times a month. It's making it so the chore's faster and the hives aren't open as long. Remember, the longer you keep the hives open, they lose heat and allow other pests and other bacteria and stuff to fly into the hive and causing problems. The less you open the hive is better, but a frequent pattern makes it so that way we can control what happens. And if you're going to do any studies or try to introduce anything, a basic pattern of 15 works out very well, and that every 15 days you can look and see what's going on. Now that your queen is out and stuff, and you're starting to check your 9 to 11 days when she's opened up, the bees will have eaten probably 3 pounds of a quart jar of honey. And this mixture is usually a 2-to-1 mixture, right, of sugar, water, 2 parts sugar to 1 part water. And we're usually using like 2 cups of sugar to 1 cup of water. It's volumetric, right? So at this time, right, your bees are probably eating your food, and you'll need to replace the food or treatment or brood build or whatever you're doing at that time, depending on what advancement of beekeeping you are. So probably 9 to 11 days you need to refill the jars or any type of feeding apparatuses that you're using. You want to open the hives now according to the 5 steps of ABFC, right, that we're going to go in with the proper PPE, the smoker, the hive tool, and we're going to eliminate by going in from the top slowly and breathe things down in the levels to start doing our inspection. Once we get into the hive, after opening up the hive, we're going to look for the cluster of bees between the frames. The heaviest amount is most likely where the queen will be staying. And then she'll be on not on one frame. She might jump from one to the other based on where that cluster is. And it's probably the largest location. Now you want to remove the frames from the west end of the hive. We're on the north part of the equator. If you're on the south part, you're probably going to be removing it probably also from the west side. The sun rises in the east, right, and moves to the west. So when the bees are oriented, we want to move from the west because the bees are moved to the light source and the heat most adequately to keep moving. And if we move those frames off from the west side and move them out, we're able to move frames from one section to the other, separating them, and not have to remove the frames completely out of the hives. So we're going to remove from the west end, moving our way until we see the cluster of comb build. Remember to keep all comb frames facing the same way in the same order when removing and placing, so we don't disrupt the building apparatus as well as how our things are moving. Because there's what we call the XYZ pattern that's made, and we don't want to disrupt the frames by flipping them or adjusting them into different measures. So those are some things that we want to keep in measured about. Now, in 9 to 11 days, if you guys are using no foundation, you got build, you're going to have probably, this is the first frame that you're going to see where the bees are working, and you're going to see more in as they go, and that's on the left side. And on the right side, you're going to see comb built on frames like this, where you're going to see patterns in the center and on the way out. On the right-hand side, this is good build. Hopefully that it's not on the tops or on the bottoms of the frame and they're not cross-combing or crossed. If you're using foundation on the right, you can see 2 good patterns and 3 or 4 bad patterns. And when I'm saying 3 or 4 bad patterns, if you look in the center, you see strips, and that's called Ber Combing, and they're not taking to the frame as well. That the frame itself is not holding the pattern we want. That we want the pattern just like that in the center there, and not burred off. That you want to start removing anything that looks like that and get the bees to build a regular pattern straight up and down. Because when that Ber combs, it's not, they're going to cross comb against a frame to frame, and they're going to start sticking. So it's not a good deal to have that. So start scraping that off, and you want good build kind of down like that. And in 9 to 11 days, we should have at least 2 to 3 frames looking like that. Good comb build and bad comb build. We will see good comb build from the tops of the frames down and off the foundation, and combs that is not with the frame or extra or not with the foundation we want to remove. We want the bees to work with the frame tops, and so we can check them for pests and growths. When they cross comb or they build that Ber comb like that, we need to get that out, or it's going to be harder for us to check. We would like to see the comb full on a frame, dark gold or light white. If you see dark coloration or like black when you're first starting out, there's something wrong with the bees. You need to start treatment. Most of the white or lighter is because when people, oh, look how beautiful, and the nectar flow must have been. It's like Caro syrup. Well, that's probably because it is. It's probably corn syrup stuff, or the sugar feeding that you're using that's making the nice light white comb. But dark gold is mostly what you're going to see, and that's from a good comb build. We hope to see in 9 to 11 days 3 or more frames being built. And maybe we can see some eggs, because the queen has already been released about 9 days ago, and we should have about 2 to 3 frames that have good comb built off of them, and some eggs and larvae being in there. We hope to see wet cells. This is nectar storage for starting bee bread, right? The mixture of pollen. And when bees are super active, we will see lots of pollen in the cells and in the frames with this, as well as the brood starting to build. So this is a good versus bad. The bad is we don't want the brooding of the frames off and getting Ber comb. So we get that off the bottoms and tops, and now they're not combing well, but we're hoping to see good flat space. This is what we're hoping to see, right? As we're looking to see the bees, the pollen, some wet space. On the bottom left, you can see some curled up larvae. This is what we want to see. You can see the bees on the frame, the cells with nectar. There's some small patterns that you'll see 1 or 2 frames after 9 to 11 days on your queen is released. It will not be the same as a full frame, like when you're getting into a nuke or in your old hive coming out of winter, but you're going to start to see these patterns of brood, and they're going to be starting to fulling out. And if you got a brand new one, it's going to think of a baseball. Think of the bees as a cluster of hives of a baseball, and you're going to have 2 to 3 frames, and the frames are going to be overlapped by a circle, and that'd be the cluster of bees, and that's where they're trying to keep their brood nesting warm. So in anything that would be considered older, you're going to see larger patterns of brood and larger patterns of pollen. The smaller you are, you're going to see smaller sections. This is what it looks like after 9 to 11 days in nature. As you can see how the ball of the bees are towards the bottom where they're working the combs down. And yes, the combs even look like a ball, right? It's the way that the bees make the pendulum run when we talked about at the beginning of our classes. But you can see down towards the bottom where the biggest bunch of bees are, down towards the bottom, would be the darkest pattern where they're trying to keep their brood nesting warm. And probably the third comb in is probably where you're going to find mostly where the queen's at, because you can see that's most of the down there. So this is basically what you're looking at 9 to 11 days out in nature. So in your hive, you're looking for that same cluster on 2 to 3 frames to 4 frames as they're building comb out, and you'll start seeing a brooding pattern in your new hive with your bees. Now, in 9 to 11 days to 18 to 22 days, which would be the next to 9/11 inspection, you're going to start seeing fuller frames. Lots more brood, pollen, bee patterns. You're going to start seeing larvae and cap cells that they're working for, right? And you might even start to see some stuff hatching, because we're talking 22 days, right? If the queen was able to get right in out of a nook, you're going to start seeing bees come all the time from laying and hatching. But this is about what it looks like in 18 to 22 days on many of your frames. If there is no cat brood in 18 days, you need a new queen. And a good way to do that is if you have another hive, you pull out rice larvae that looks like on the left, or hopefully you might have another hive that has one of these and you can just remove a queen by shaking it off. These are more advanced skills that if you don't have a queen, you need to get one. And I suggest you learn how to make queens. All good in 18 to 22 days. So in the next 9 to 11 check, we were 18 to 22 things. All things were good. We had frames of brood, right? We should have 3 or 4 of them that are full frames of brood. Frames of comb, we should have 5 to 7, meaning 3 or 4 of those should have full frames of brood. We should be able to locate the queen every time. This helps us identify that if we don't have a problem or if we need to make one. And at this time, we might see some bees hatching because we're in the 22-day cycle, and we have nooks as well as old hives coming out of winter. But our new package of bees, we will definitely see maybe 1 or 2 bees hatching. We need to make sure that they're working, right? That the bees are coming in and out, bringing in pollen, and that the flow is good, and we can add another box. If they're not working, we are having mending problems. So if they're working, we add a box now after about 22 days. And if they're not working, we need to make mending problems. Mending problems. Mending problems are no brood, and we're doing our pest checks. So if we don't have any brood, you know, we probably need to get a new queen. If we're not seeing a queen or anything like that, we need to get one. If we're seeing brood and no queen, it's hard to say if we have a queen or not. The best thing is see if you have eggs and larvae. If you see no eggs and larvae, get a queen. If we're seeing brooding patterns, but it's not great brooding patterns, maybe older or the queen's not adapting to what's going on, we need a new queen. Everything that I'm telling you right now is if you're seeing big drone build, not a lot of brooding, bad patterns, you're not seeing any larvae, you're not seeing any brooding patterns, you need a queen. Learn how to make them. Get a couple hives, work with some other beekeepers, and find how to make queens and get them. On your pest checks, right, for a new beekeeper, if you're seeing brood and stuff, this is where you start doing your preventative stuff. You need to make feeds and stuff to make the bees stronger. They're BTs. We make a BT that we add. You can get a listing from Spikenard Farms. They make a BT. I think Nature Image Farms out of Ohio, they make a BT. There's different like feed treatments that you can use to start feeding your bees, to start treating them. I don't think that's spelled right. It says put oleic acid, oleic, folic. I mean, you can start doing vapor, smoke, or leaf treatments and start doing preventative, because once you start seeing brooding, this is where we can start getting pests in to start eating, such as Varroa destructor mites or trachea mites or hive beetle. All right, so we want to start getting stuff in there to start treating them. And then in more your advanced skills and stuff, the people that are, you know, in their but more journeyman or onto their master apprenticeship programs, you know, grab some bees, start doing your alcohol washes, your trachea check under your. Right now, the bees are just starting out in the spring. You're in your first 30 days. This is probably the best time to start doing preventative maintenance. And if you do your preventative maintenance now, you're not going to have problems later. And this is a good way to start doing and grabbing those preventative topics. But we're going to go with all's good in 18 to 22 days, right? We didn't have to replace queens. We're not having problems with pests, right? So in 18 to 22 days, we did our checks. Frames of brood, 5 frames, right? We're finding queens and we're doing great. So that's what we're going by with a good check, right? So if we have a good check, we're adding a box. Now what? Well, before we started all this, we took the weight of our box before we put the bees in. And we should always weigh the new box. So before we add a new box, weigh it. And then take the weight of the hive before. Take the weight of the hive with the boxes together. You know, we've had a starting out weight of 27 to 35 pounds, and in 9 to 11 days, it was 37 to 40, and 18 to 20, the next was 45. We're having about a gain of 3 to 5 pounds every 9 to 11 days, and this is about average. So what the weight is coming on the adjunction is more comb, more brood, more pollen, no nectar, and even honey storage is being added. So we're going to get weight of about 3 to 4 pounds every 9 to 11 days. And the new box will fill up with brood over the next 30 days, right? And that's over the next 2 hive. You're going to have 2 more hive checks after this. So, right. So if you're adding a new box, you're going to start having bees hatch, right? Because we're already going into 30-day time period, and most bees are hatching between the 24 and 27 day. So we're already going to start having new release, and we have already, like I said, we've already probably have 5 to 6 frames full of brood and comb. And if you haven't already added a box, you're going to start seeing queen cells at this time. And so in 30 days, if everything's going well, you need to add a box. You're going to start having swarming problems and queen cells. In 27 to 30 days, this is what your beehive will look like. 33 days, the bees will start integrating up into the hive, up into the other box, right? So we've already done on our 3rd hive check, we've added a box, and they're already going to start integrating up into the top. And that's something that's good that we want, because they're going to start making more brood in those patterns up there. All right, that's the presentation. Basically, that's a 30-day time check that we should be adding our next box, and everything looked really good. We're going to start looking at now the patterns of involvement and how things are going out at the beehive yard.